Today looking at 3 different apps that allow you to record cinematic mode style video, aka portrait video, meaning you're recording a video on a smartphone with a shallow depth of field or a blurry background. Learn how to turn your smartphone into a professional quality video camera. Be sure to check out our mobile filmmaking courses. And also, don't forget, we have a companion filmmaking podcast. Links are in the description. With the iPhone 13, Apple released its cinematic mode. And as video creators and filmmakers, that is a really interesting and, honestly pretty cool concept to knock the background out of focus using a small sensor. Now, you can do that with a smartphone, but typically speaking, you need to be close to a subject or using the telephoto lens. But now with cinematic mode, you definitely can get that look. However, this is actually not a new concept. There are several apps that have had this feature for a while. And so today I'm going to look at a couple of those apps and compare it to the native iPhone camera. So the first one we'll look at is actually the iPhone, and this is an iPhone 13 Pro Max. I'm in cinematic mode, and as I mentioned, you now have control to make the background or the foreground go out of focus, more like a traditional camera. And so right now the wall is in focus. And now I click on it and the color checker is in focus. And so you can go back and forth while you're recording manually like that, or you can actually pan and tilt and it will automatically do it. So now I'm on the color checker and you pan over. And now that's in focus over there. That gear on the side is in focus. And you come back. And now the color checker is in focus. So it does auto rack focus, which is, pretty cool. And it does a pretty realistic job, I have to say. And it particularly works well with faces. Now your shooting controls are fairly limited in the app, but you can set the aperture, meaning how much shallow depth of field you get. I'm finding around f5 looks the best. Anything more than that starts looking kind of fake. And then you can also set the exposure compensation. The iPhone tends to shoot a little bit hot. It overexposes. So a lot of people will come in here and set this a little bit lower, like maybe -1, or I like to do -0.7. That's when I'm outside. If I'm inside, I leave it on default, which is 0. And beyond that, that's really the only controls you have besides, again, doing the focus. You can do an AF tracking lock like I did right there. You click on the subject, and then now when you pan, it will stay locked onto that, and that's what it will track focus-wise. Or you can also hold your finger down the screen, and it will do an autofocus lock. And so now that will stay in focus regardless of where you pan the camera. So last time that racked focus over there, but because I had the focus locked, it won't. One thing you might notice though, as I'm panning around, and this is one big negative to the native app, but really all these apps using cinematic mode, is the white balance doesn't lock. And so the white balance stays auto. Now, maybe there's a way to lock that because there is in the regular shooting mode, but in the cinematic mode, I have not found a way to lock the white balance, and that's really unfortunate. Shooting in cinematic mode, it's 1080 HD, so it's HD only, and it's 30 frames per second. It's not 24, and that is one thing I don't really like. I'm hoping they'll add 24p or even 25p for our PAL friends. So now I'll roll on a sample clip. And now here is a little microphone that has obviously a windscreen on it. And this is the number one thing that these apps have trouble with. And that is the edges that are not clean. Frizzy edges, i.e. hair especially. These apps don't work that well with it. Still a pretty cool look, but you can see around the edge there where it's kind of soft. But it racks back there nicely to the color checker. All right, and now the last thing that's really cool with using the iPhone is you can go in post-production and you can set your focus marks. All along here at the bottom, you see little dots, and those are keyframes that the app automatically set. And you can go in there and you can set your own and rack between objects and change the focus in post-production, which is a really big thing. You could also, if you want to edit within the app here, you can use the various presets they have in here. You can crop the image. Very similar to what you can do in the Photos app or in the native camera app for traditional shot video. For me, more times than not, I will edit this in post-production. And the one other note that I want to say, you can also shoot HDR within cinematic mode in the iPhone, and that is a nice feature. I actually have it turned off right now, but having that ability to shoot HDR is great. All right, now I'm in an app called Focos Live, and this app has been around a while. And the nice thing about this app is this works on previous generation phones. The iPhone 13 is the only one cinematic mode works on. That will not work on previous iPhones. And so if you don't have the latest, greatest iPhone, this is an app to do a simulated depth of field shot, shallow depth of field. And you can see right here on the side, this is the record button. It has the depth map that you can actually see what it's doing with the LiDAR sensor. And I don't want to go too technical, but the LiDAR sensor is what makes this possible, or what makes it better. It could do it before without LiDAR, but with LiDAR, it makes it a cleaner cutout, so to speak. And so like I'll put my hand here, you can see now with that, creating the depth map around my hand. Now with this app, you can shoot 30 or you can shoot 60. It's also HD. Additionally, here you actually can shoot in film looks while you're recording. You can also add this in editing, but you can shoot it while you're recording as well, which is nice depending on what you're doing. I would say this is really geared more towards social media users, not people that are going to be doing stuff in post-production. The other nice thing this app does is you can pick the aspect ratio while you're recording. Again, for social media, I think this would be good. So 16:9 is the default, but you could do widescreen, which is kind of cool, 2:3:5:1. You could do square or 3:4, depending on what you're doing, Facebook or Instagram or what have you. And so you've got options, which is nice. I personally would shoot 16:9 unless you want to shoot vertical, but shooting 16:9, then you can crop the other way later. That's more or less all it's doing. It's cropping the image for you as you're recording. I like to have more control and do that in post. You also can lock the exposure. And then you can also touch the screen similar to like in the native app and go between what you have in focus and then not in focus. And so that way you can do more or less focus pulls. Then you can also separate this and lock the focus and then lock the exposure. You have a reticle for focus and then a reticle for exposure. And then when you lock it, it puts the icon down there, and then now those are locked. And so nothing is moving when you're panning or tilting, etc. And to unlock them, you click right there, and now they're unlocked. And so now when I move, the shot will change. And you could see the exposure change there a little bit. And again, you could see the white balance slightly shift there too, which again, I wish you could lock the white balance. For whatever reason, these apps don't let you do that. Or maybe set a preset to where it's all the same white balance. So with this app, you do a lot of the stuff in the edit, sort of like with the iPhone cinematic mode. But here, like with the aperture, you set that in post. So I'll record a clip. And I'll put the microphone out here. This app, when you're recording, It looks to my eye like it's cleaner than the cinematic mode. The edges look better. However, I've discovered when you're editing this clip in the app, it doesn't hold as well as the preview does here, which I found to be interesting. And it racks back. The rack back is slower. Apple has done a really good job, again, making rack focus look real, look realistic. All right, and so that clip is now in the library here. But now you can play it back in post-production, and you have these controls at the bottom. You've got the aperture size, the focus, the highlights, the shape of it. You have a lot of different things you can change. Right there, you can see that the checker is really out of focus there, and I can adjust that. That's a better representation of that. And then you can adjust the color. You can adjust the various exposure aspects, the hue, saturation. You have a lot of control there. You've got the filters that I showed earlier that you had when you're shooting, but you can also apply these in post-production. And so this app has a lot of control built into the app, but again, I tend to edit in post-production besides the various aperture controls that at this point you can only do in the app. You can't do that in post-production on a computer yet. Although with the native iPhone camera, you can now do that within Final Cut Pro and iMovie, and I'll have to do a tutorial on that soon. And so this file lives in the Focos app, and then you can export it after you've done your various tweaks in post-production. All right, and the last app I'm going to demo today is Protake. Now, I did a video with Protake back when it snowed in Dallas. We had that bad snowstorm, and so I went out and did a sample short film, and it looked pretty good. I mean, it's not great. The edges are fuzzy, but this was back before the iPhone 13 came out, and so it was one of the only options. And again, apps like Protake and Focos Live, and there may be a few others, have offered this for a while, and it really got better with the iPhone 12 Pro Max because of the LiDAR. But again, it works with previous generation iPhones. I don't know how far it goes back, but I know it works with the 11 Pro Max as well. So in Protake, a few things that make it different is it is 1080p, but you'll notice here that it is 24 frames per second. And so you've got options of 24, 25, or 30. And to me, that is really cool. I much prefer 24. When I'm thinking of cinematic, I'm thinking of movies or narrative filmmaking, I shoot 24p. So having that option is great. I'm not sure why the other apps don't do it. There's got to be a technical reason, but Protake does it. Now in Protake, they actually call their video portrait video, which is taken from the photography world. So you choose portrait, and then you have your aperture control up here. Again, I'm shooting with a larger aperture. I find that it just looks a little bit more realistic. You start getting like a f2 or f2.8 or something. It depends on what you're shooting. Mainly it's about the edges, cutting the edges out. And the other thing you can switch in this is you can do visual mode or you can do LiDAR mode. Visual mode is what I would do on previous generation phones that don't have LiDAR. But if you have LiDAR, do that. And I just noticed right there, it crops in more on visual. So you get a little bit of a wider shot using the LiDAR than you do with the visual, which is more of an AI type thing. Now, Protake also has a display here of the depth map, which is kind of cool. I like that, like seeing what it's cutting out. You can see how when my hand is up there, the background goes nice and soft, like a traditional camera. And I think the focus pull is pretty good in Protake. It's better than in Focos Live. I don't think it's quite as good or quite as realistic as native app on the 13, but it's pretty good. You can also change the aspect ratio in this app, but it's just doing a crop. That's really all it's doing. And so again, I would shoot in the standard 16:9 and do any cropping later in post-production. The only exception would be if you're shooting something quickly and you want to post it to social media. That way doing it in the app will save you time and you might not care. Just like the other apps, this app, you can see the white balance change. You can't lock the white balance. I don't understand that personally. That's one of the biggest giveaways that you're shooting lower end video. Whenever you're shooting on auto, I do manual settings anytime I can. I don't mind autofocus, but I don't like auto white balance. So now I'll roll on a clip. White balance is changing, but so is the focus. I'm panning back across. Now the color checker's in focus, and now I'll do the microphone test. I find that out of the three, Protake is the worst with cutting out the edges like this, the fuzzy edges of a microphone or hair. Watch how the focus just pulses when I put it in. That's pretty abrupt and pretty aggressive. And the edges are not great. One side note, I do like in Protake how when you're shooting, the edges of the screen turn red. It reminds me of a Sony mirrorless camera. That way you know you're recording. While none of these are perfect, far from it actually, I would say the iPhone performed the best. Next up for me would be Protake, and then Focos Live would be last. And I'm talking about the look of the footage, not necessarily the functionality of the app. So now let's talk about the pros and the cons of each. For the native iPhone camera app, the biggest pros are the rack focus. It's very realistic and easy to change in editing in the app. And you can actually turn the look off completely after the fact if you want to. So having options like that are really great. The depth map cutouts are not perfect, but compared to the other apps, they are superior and more usable. And it's especially better on moving shots. Now, even though I didn't shoot an HDR in this demo, having that ability really makes that stand out because it's 10-bit video. And so you get a higher quality video file for color grading and ultimately distribution. The other apps shoot in 8-bit video. The main cons are it only shoots 30 frames per second, and you can't lock the white balance, but that problem is the same for all the apps. Focos Live, its biggest pros are you have lots of control over the final look using the in-app features, including choosing the aspect ratio, the various film looks, and all the editing options. You can also actually edit cinematic mode videos in Focos Live too, but you can't edit Protake videos. It's also nice that you can shoot 30 or 60 frames per second. And when you export a clip, you can choose 24 or 25 frames per second as well. So it's doing a conversion, but that's a cool option to have. The main con though is also the editing aspect, as I found that it's best to use it versus just an untouched raw clip. So that can take some time to do, especially if you have a bunch of clips to go through. Also, moving shots don't seem to work as well as static ones, in particular compared to the native iPhone camera. And lastly, while the app offers a lot of features for free, to get the most from it, including the highest quality exports, you have to pay for it, which I personally don't mind, but I know some people won't like that. And last but not least, Protake. Its biggest pros are you can shoot 24 frames per second in the app. And to me, that is really cool, and it's actually a cinematic look. And you can use their portrait mode video on previous generation phones, not just the iPhone 13. And so that makes it more widely available. And this is actually true for Focos Live as well. And the portrait mode video in Protake is just a small part of an all-around excellent video camera app. It has a lot of great pro features above and beyond portrait video, including manual control, LUTs, and a very good user interface. So it's just all around a good app. The main con though with Protake is you actually cannot edit the portrait mode videos after the fact like you can with the other two apps. Or if you can, I haven't figured out how to do it. So you're locked into whatever you shoot. Also, it's not great on moving shots, similar to Focos Live. The edges just don't hold up very well. So I would probably stick to shooting static shots when using portrait mode video in this app. And lastly, again, like Focos Live, this app has some nice free features, including the portrait mode video, but to access all its best options, it's also a paid app. But this one is a yearly subscription. Now, it's affordable, but I'm not really a fan of subscription apps. Ultimately, cinematic mode video, portrait mode video, whatever you want to call it, is really a work in progress. It needs a few more years to mature, but it is a lot of fun to use, and in particular for social media. So yeah, in my opinion, it's not really ready for prime time just yet. But I do look forward to watching these apps and the tech advance and hopefully one day soon get perfected. But what do you think? Use any of these apps? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. This is Blake Calhoun. Please like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.